Well, joining us now from Oxfordshire, England, is Richard Johnson. He's a lecturer in US politics at Queen Mary University of London. We are going to get to what Donald Trump said about IVF, but let's first start with his struggle, I guess, to stick to a position on reproductive rights. Why is he straying from the Republican message about abortion? Because he appears to have upset many conservatives.
Well, if you go back early in Trump's public life, Trump was someone who was pretty relaxed about abortion rights, would have described himself as a pro-choice individual. When he ran for the presidency, he realized that within the Republican Party, overturning Roe v. Wade was a major motivating force, particularly for evangelical Christian voters. And Trump committed to appointing judges to overturn Roe, and he was successful in doing that. Overturning Roe was a very unifying message for the Republican Party. But once you overturn Roe, then you have to decide what replaces Roe, and that is decided at the state level. Okay, that's been Trump's line. But Trump lives in a state. He happens to live in a state that now has an amendment about changing the abortion laws of that state. And Trump has a vote on that referendum. And that is Trump's problem now, is that he is being pinned down by having to make a state level decision about abortion rights. Now, Amendment 4, I think, is particularly tricky for Trump because Florida has this ban after 6 weeks, which Trump has said, he's on the record, he thinks that's too short. This amendment would push abortion rights up to the point of viability, or possibly later based on a consultation with a doctor about women's health. Now, from Republican standpoint, that's too far, but also Trump doesn't like the 6-week ban. So he's kind of caught in between. I think Trump might be comfortable with where, say, John Roberts had landed in the Dobbs decision, which was, accept a 15-week limit, but that's not on the ballot. And this is the problem that Trump has created for millions of Americans, is that they have to make these decisions state by state, and the instruments for making those decisions can be pretty blunt.
And Richard, as we just heard from Donald Trump, he's now proposing that all women have access to IVF through either the government or through insurance. I mean, is he trying to appease women voters, perhaps put off by his abortion stance?
Yeah, I think the IVF issue has become a bit of a liability for Republicans. The Harris campaign, particularly with the introduction of Tim Walz onto the ticket, has made alternative reproduction options for parents center stage, because although Tim Walz didn't have IVF, he and his wife had alternative reproduction treatments that brought about their daughter Hope. And there's a story that I think many American couples and families can recognize as something that would be desirable, or they sympathize with people who are struggling to have a family, but want to have a family. And the Republican Party is meant to be the party of family. Certainly that was its message once upon a time, was it was the party of family values. And to be seen as a party that would restrict those reproduction options has been an uncomfortable place for the Republican Party. So that's why I think Trump has now come out and basically made this really bold gesture of an unfunded, as it seems to be at the moment, commitment that the federal government would either pay for or require insurance companies to provide IVF to anyone who wanted it, which is a very expensive procedure. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah. Absolutely. If we can now just turn to Kamala Harris's first interview with Tim Walz. I'm sorry, a lot to squeeze into this conversation. Yeah. How did you rate her performance, and did she achieve what she needed to?
I think she did achieve what she needed to do. She needed to avoid making any gaffes or anything that could be clippable by the Republicans as a baseline. She far exceeded that. She came across, I think, as very poised, very measured, very confident. I actually thought Walz wasn't really necessary in that interview. I know it's traditional after the convention that you have the nominee, the president and vice president, be interviewed together. I can understand why they did that, but I actually think for her first interview, she would have been perfectly fine doing a solo first interview. I actually thought Walz came across as a little bit more nervous than Harris. Maybe he's a bit newer to the national stage, but I thought she had a very competent performance. She's going to need to do more interviews. This can't be a one-off. and she's going to have to, particularly, I think, develop her policy message. I think that's the area now where people are expecting to see a little bit more from her.
I mean, the critics would say, you know, it was vague, it was vacuous. She had to refer to notes. There was no deep dive into her policy positions. But I guess at the end of the day, this is about swing states, undecided voters that she needs to win over. Do you think this interview helped in that regard, or will the presidential debate be the true test?
I think what she did in this debate she had to answer some serious questions about changes in her policy position from when she ran in the Democratic primary way back in 2019. I think that was her first major hurdle. She had taken various commitments which were quite progressive, quite liberal during the primary. That's not unusual for a candidate to do that in a primary contest, is to hug to the base, but then tack to the center in the general election. And in effect, I think she did a reasonable job at explaining why she was no longer, you know, for example, a fan of a ban on fracking, for example. And I think you know, that's a difficult thing for any politician to say. I once said something, but now I'm saying something else. But I thought she made that transition quite well. But yes, I would agree that when it comes to the policy detail, she was light on detail in that interview, and she's going to need to work on that and do, again, more interviews to flesh that out in the weeks to come.
Richard Johnson, great to get your analysis. Thanks so much for joining us.